بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وعملا يا رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome to this session on the fiqh of fasting. In the last couple of days, we listened to Imam Tahir and Dr. Abdullah Ali going over the fiqh of fasting in both the Hanafi and the Maliki school. Today, inshallah, we will go over the fiqh of fasting in the Shafi'i school. We'll go for about an hour, and then we'll open the floor for questions and answers. The book I'll be using for this session is here on the slide. It's The Reliance of the Traveler. It's an intermediate level Shafi'i text written in a very rigorous language in the Arabic. The translator has done a good job in simplifying the language and making it accessible to almost everyone. I'll also be using a couple of other books, which you will see on the slides. This is a good book to carry, and if you don't have the book already, I would recommend that you take a close look at it, and perhaps it will be a good addition to your library. The outline for this session, we will begin with an introduction to fasting, and we'll talk about the wisdom and benefits of fasting. The wisdom and benefits of fasting merit its own session. So we won't go much in detail about the wisdom and benefits of fasting, because this session is heavily skewed on the rulings and on the fiqh of fasting. But we'll cover enough, inshallah. And then we'll move on to the integrals of fasting. We'll talk about the recommended acts and the offensive acts during fasting. And most importantly, we'll focus on the invalidators of fasting. What breaks a fast? What invalidates the fast? And if we have time, we'll go over i'tikaf, devotional retreat, and talk about it. And we'll end up with various scenarios that we encounter all the time, and we'll go over them. Before we begin, let's review some terminology that I'll be using during this session. First of all, let's talk about what is a day, an Islamic day. The Islamic day is like the Jewish day. It begins at sunset and ends at sunset. So in the Islamic day, the night precedes the day. As soon as sunset enters, a new day has begun. And for this reason, when we look for the moon, we want to look for the moon in the first day of Ramadan, i.e. after sunset. Before sunset, sighting the moon is of no relevance because it belongs to the previous day. Let's talk about daylight hours. Daylight hours are defined as the hours between dawn and sunset. It's not from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. It's from dawn, from the true dawn, until the sun has completely set. What are the night hours? The night hours are the opposite. It's from sunset to true dawn. The word day also is used in two meanings. Sometimes we use a day to indicate 24 hours, i.e. from sunset to sunset. And sometimes we use the day as in opposition to the night. We use the day to indicate daylight. When we talk about night hours, we should also talk about midnight. Midnight, Islamically or legally, or in the fiqh sense, it's a midpoint between sunset and dawn. So if sunset was at 7 p.m. and dawn was at 3 a.m., then midnight would be 11 p.m. It would not be the midnight that we are accustomed to. So when you read the word midnight in Islamic terminology or in fiqh terminology, we're talking about the midpoint between sunset and dawn. Next is the Day of Doubt. The Day of Doubt is the 30th of Shaban, because on the 29th of Shaban, we go out to look for the moon. So the 30th of Shaban could be a doubtful day. Is it from Shaban or is it from Ramadan? We will also encounter various other terms that we will be using in this session. For example, the word fidya. Fidya is like, I use the word here, payment. Fidya is like a penalty. It's like a payment penalty, equivalent to Zakat al-Fitr. So the amount of payment is equivalent to the amount of payment of Zakat al-Fitr. And some people who may not be able to fast, they may have to pay a fidya. Kafara, on the other hand, is an expiation. And it's much more rigorous than fidya. Kafara is an expiation that is used in the Islamic terminology for various scenarios. One of them is having sexual intercourse in the day of Ramadan. If such a case occurs, then a person will have to do a kafara. Next, there are two terms that we will talk a lot when we get to invalidators of fasting. The first one is cavity, and by cavity we don't mean tooth cavity. We're not going to the dentist today. We're talking about body cavities, and the body cavities are 9 in total. So we'll talk about the most prevalent one that we may encounter. And the next terminology is a passageway, open passageway. And there are various open passageways, like the throat, the stomach, the genitals, the nose, anything that will allow air or food or drink or anything else to go through. That's considered to be an open passageway. And we're talking about open passageway in the fiqh sense, not in the medical sense. So open passageway legally may differ from open passageway medically. So the eye, which is an open passageway medically, is not an open passageway legally or fiqh-wise. So remember these terms because I may refer to them in the session. Next, we're on slide 4. So we begin with fasting Ramadan. The word for fasting in Arabic is called sawm or siyam. We have two words in Arabic that refer to fasting. Siyam Ramadan or sawm Ramadan. Ramadan is one of the months in the Hijri calendar. It's month number 9 and is considered to be the best of months. In this month, the Quran was revealed. And fasting Ramadan is a distinctive feature of this community, of this ummah. As we shall see, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, fasting is prescribed for you as it was prescribed for those before you. So those before us used to fast. And perhaps they used to fast a different type of fasting, different format. But fasting as practiced by Muslim is a distinctive feature of this ummah, of this community. And fasting was prescribed actually after immigration, after the Prophet ﷺ migrated to Medina. It was prescribed in the second year of Hijrah. And as such, the Prophet ﷺ fasted for 9 years before he passed away, all of which was 29 days, except for one. So he fasted eight Ramadan of 29 days each, and one Ramadan, which is full, 30 days. Fasting is prescribed and is established by the Quran, by the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and by Ijma'. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed the word fasting in between two words. He says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. He placed the word fasting, كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ. Siyam is ordained for you. Siyam is prescribed for you. After the word Iman, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, O you who believe, كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ. So Siyam was preceded by Iman, and after Siyam came Taqwa. Iman is foundation for Siyam, and Siyam is between these two. If we have Iman and we perform Siyam properly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will help us achieve Taqwa. Fasting is prescribed for you as it was prescribed for those before you. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. Perhaps you may achieve or realize Taqwa. Or perhaps you may shield yourself from things that cause us to be away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Fasting also is established by the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ in the famous hadith, بُنِيَ الْإِسْلَامُ عَلَى خَمْسٍ. Islam is built upon 5 things. And one of them, at the end, he says, and fasting Ramadan. And also fasting is established by the ijma' of the scholarly ijma', the scholarly consensus of this community. We shall move on now to slide 5. Talk a little bit about the wisdom of fasting and the benefits of fasting. The word taqwa is established and is mentioned in the verse in the Quran, and it's one of the first wisdom behind fasting. Is tahqiq al-taqwa, is to realize or to achieve the state of God's consciousness. Taqwa also means a shield. One of the meaning and the connotation of taqwa is a shield, is a fence. It's something that it's a buffer, something that we put between ourselves and the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, between ourselves and hellfire. So if one has taqwa and follows the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the best of their ability, they're actually building a shield. They're shielding themselves from the tribulations of the hereafter. Another wisdom of taqwa is to help us develop self-control. تعويد النفس على الصبر. And Ramadan is mentioned, described as the month of patience, the month of sabr, the month of self-control. Another wisdom is taqwiyatul irada, is to strengthen our resolve in breaking our desires. We tame our desires. We tame the desires of the stomach and the genitals in fasting. Fasting also helps us develop a good habit and help us get rid of bad habits. especially the good habits of giving. تعويد الإنسان أو تعويد النفس على الإحسان. And also in fasting there are many medical benefits. تحقيق راحة الأبدان. We give our body a rest. And we get rid of toxic materials that have accumulated within our body throughout times. Especially in this time of COVID, where I was reading yesterday that there was a report that they did a survey and found out that people have gained between 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds every month for the last 10 months. Working from home may cause us to gain weight and eat unhealthy food. So fasting can also help us get rid of that. Sultan al-Ulama Al-Izz ibn Abd al-Salam wrote a book called Fawaid al-Sawm, The Benefits of Fasting. And in it he mentioned many benefits. Some of them is رفع الدرجات, elevating in rank, wiping out sins, breaking our desires and taming our desires, increasing charitable deeds, and facilitating acts of devotion. He also mentioned another benefit, that in fasting we are really thanking. We thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is the all-knowing, the knower of secrets. And in fasting, when we fast and we preoccupy ourselves with fasting and with reciting the Quran and with doing good deeds, we don't have time to think of unworthy thoughts. So fasting also helps us get rid of unworthy thoughts or lowly thoughts. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elevate our rank through fasting. Because he said, إِلَّا الصَّوْمَ فَإِنَّهُ لِي وَأَنَا أَجْزِي بِهِ. Except for fasting, it is for me, and I shall reward those who fast. Usually when you want to get near someone, you bring them gifts. You don't try to get into their proximity and to get near to them by refraining yourself from food. In this case, we refrain ourselves and we restrain ourselves from the appetite of our stomach and the appetite of our genitals, solely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's unusual for people to get near one another in this manner. So in fasting, usually showing off doesn't happen. You show off when you give gifts to other people, when you invite people, when you show in your Ferrari, but not by being by yourself and restraining yourself from food, from drink, from things that are appealing to our stomach and to our desires. Let's begin by defining fasting. Fasting has two meanings. Has a lexical meaning and has a technical meaning. So in the language, fasting means to abstain, means abstention, means to abstain, means to restrain, it means to refrain. Maryam alayhi salam says, Inni nazartu lirrahmani sawma. Maryam, Sayyidah Maryam alayhi salam says, I have vowed to fast for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How? By refraining from talking. فَلَنْ أُكَلِّمَ الْيَوْمَ إِنْسِيًّا. So to refrain from anything, to refrain from a certain act, be it reading, be it talking, be it listening, be it anything, in the language it's called fasting. But in Sharia, fasting refers to a specific thing. It's a devotional act. It's devoting oneself to God, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through restraining oneself from things that invalidate the fast. And we shall go over these things that invalidate the fast, while having a specific intention for doing so. We will go over the intention and what are the components, the essential components of the intention. And the intention will vary depending on whether we're fasting an obligatory fast or a recommended fast. For the entire duration of the daylight hours, i.e., from dawn until sunset, of a day on which it is valid to fast. We will also find out that there are certain days that is prohibited to fast on those days. So fasting basically is devotion to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through restraining ourselves from things that invalidate our fast while having a specific intention for doing so for the entire duration of the daylight hours of days which are valid to fast on. Before going into the rulings of fasting, let's talk about Ramadan and how does Ramadan begin. For a person to start fasting the following day, one must come to a conclusion that Ramadan has begun. And there are 9 ways of determining that Ramadan has begun. We will not go over the 9 ways. I'll just mention a few of them. Number 1 is citing the new moon yourself. If you cite the new moon yourself, then you must fast, because you are now certain that Ramadan has begun. Citing the new moon has conditions, so we'll mention those conditions on the next slide. Or if you didn't cite it yourself, citing the new moon by an upright witness. Not every witness, not every person who sees the moon can be considered an upright witness. So that's a condition. So either yourself or someone that's trustworthy has seen the moon, or by the ruling of the court. The judge, who is a mujtahid judge, makes a ruling that Ramadan has begun. Why? Because people have come to him and have given witnesses. There are certain procedures that judges follow when they do these things. Or Darul Fatwa, for example, in a country. Or by trusting someone. If someone comes to you and tells you that Ramadan has begun, they have witnessed the moon. And perhaps this person does not fulfill all the conditions and the qualifications of an upright witness. But you trust that person. And if you trust that person, then Ramadan has begun for you, and tomorrow you must fast. There are other ways for establishing Ramadan. If Sha'ban, for example, if we complete Sha'ban 30 days, then automatically Ramadan is the following day. The Hijri month is either 29 days or 30 days. We don't have any month which is 28 days. We don't have any month which is 31 days. The Hijri months are either 29 days or 30 days. So by completing Sha'ban 30 days, automatically Ramadan has begun. Citing the new moon. When we cite the new moon, what are we interested in? Are we interested in the birth of the moon? When the moon is born? No, we're not. Are we interested in the age of the new moon? No, we're not. i.e., are we interested in the birth of the moon only? No, we're not. Are we interested in the age of the moon only? No, we're not. Are we interested in the rise of the moon? Because the moon rises like the sun rises, and the moon sets like the sun sets. The moon has its own rise time and setting time. Are we interested in the rise time of the moon? No, we're not. Are we interested in the moon and the time where the moon sets only? No, we're not. So what are we interested in? How do we determine that Ramadan has begun by sighting the new moon? When we sighting the new moon to indicate the beginning of a month requires the contribution of both the moon and the sun. Remember, the Islamic day begins from sunset to sunset. So the Islamic day is defined by the sun. The legal day, the fiqh day, is defined by the sun. But the beginning of the month is defined by the new moon when seen in the first day of the new month. And the first day of the new month is always determined by sunset. I.e., we're interested that the moon is born. We're interested that the moon has now completed a certain age or certain number of hours. We're not interested in the moon rising. We're interested in the moon setting. As the moon is setting, we're interested in the moon setting after sunset, not before sunset. If the moon sets before sunset, if we see the moon 10 minutes before sunset, it belongs to the current day. It does not belong to the new day, which begins at sunset. When Ramadan begins at sunset, that night is the first night of Ramadan. Remember, the night precedes the day in the Islamic Hijri calendar. So to summarize, citing the new moon and we have many people here in Zaytuna and elsewhere in the world that go and cite the new moon. What do? They go and cite the new moon after sunset. As we are told that التمسوه بين المغرب والعشاء. Seek it between Maghrib and Isha. And in the first day of Ramadan, in the first day of the month, the moon is called the waxing crescent and is about to set. And it may set 10-15 minutes after sunset. So you don't have much time. So people try to observe the moon and sight the moon after sunset. That's when the month begins. Not when the moon is born. Not when the moon is a certain age. Not when the moon is visible, but before sunset. We want to make sure that the moon is visible or can be visible after sunset, not before sunset. Let's move on to Ahkam al-Siyam, the rulings on fasting. Fasting is like anything else. It does not have a fixed ruling. It's like prayer. It does not have a fixed ruling. A prayer can be obligatory, can be haram, can be recommended, can be makruh, offensive, and can be permissible. The 5 prayers are obligatory. The sunnah prayers are recommended. Praying at night is voluntary, is permissible. There are certain times where prayer is offensive. And there are certain scenarios where prayer is not only offensive, but also prohibited and haram. Same thing with fasting. Fasting does not take a fixed ruling and that's it. It's very dynamic, like prayer. So fasting can be mandatory, can be obligatory, can be mandub, recommended, can be makruh, offensive, and can be unlawful. And when fasting is unlawful, there are two scenarios, there are two possibilities. It can be unlawful and invalid, or it can be unlawful, yet the fast is valid. We will not cover the unlawfulness of fasting while the fast is valid. We'll cover the unlawfulness of fasting and while it's invalid. So fasting is mandatory in many cases. I shall mention a few of them. Ramadan, fasting Ramadan is mandatory, is obligatory, is wajib. For those who fulfill certain conditions. A make-up day of fast is also obligatory. Kafara is obligatory. A vow, if one makes a vow to fast a certain day, or if something takes place, one vows to fast, then that fast becomes obligatory. Or in certain scenarios in Hajj and Umrah, fast is a substitute for fidya and for certain acts that happen in Hajj or Umrah. فَصِيَامُ ثَلَاثَةِ أَيَّامٍ فِي الْحَجِّ, and 7 days when you go back. So fasting, all these days are obligatory. So fasting can be mandatory, can be obligatory. And here we mentioned 5 of them. Fasting also can be recommended. And the recommended fasting, there are various scenarios. There are days that are recommended yearly. They only happens once a year. And if you miss them, you have to wait a year. There are days that are recommended monthly. So they happen every month. And if you miss them, you have to wait a month before you can pray them, before you can fast them. There are days recommended to fast weekly. So if you miss this week, you can do it next week. And there is another recommended fast, which is every other day, like some prophets used to fast. So recommended fasting could be yearly, monthly, weekly, or every other day. Yearly, like Ashura, it happens once a year. Like the 9th of Dhul Hijjah, on the day of Arafah, it happens once a year. If we miss this day, we have to wait another year before we can fast it as recommended fast. Monthly, there are certain days in the month, like the Ayyamul Bid, the white nights, the 13th, 14th, and 15th of each month. They happen every month when the moon is full. Weekly, like Monday and Thursday, they happen every week. It's sunnah to fast on Monday, it's sunnah to fast on Thursday. Oh, the last one is every other day. i.e., if you want to fast all the time, it's not recommended. And it was one of the habits of the Prophet ﷺ, one of his teachings, that if you do something, keep doing it. If we force ourselves to fast every other day and then we quit, if we force ourselves to recite the Quran for a week and then we quit for a year, that's not continuity. It's better to do something small and little and keep doing it continuously. Develop the habit of doing it all the time. But if someone wants to fast every other day, they can, and it's recommended for those who can and can keep it up. There are certain fasts that are offensive, like fasting on Friday only, to single out Friday, or to single out Saturday, or to single out Sunday by fasting, or to fast every day. Every day of your life you're fasting, except for the 5 days that it's haram to fast. So not only you fast Ramadan, but you fast also every other day except Eid days. There are certain days which are unlawful to fast. There are 5 days in the year which one cannot fast. And if one fasts on those days, not only the fast is unlawful, but is also invalid. Eid al-Fitr, Eid al-Adha, the 3 days following Eid al-Adha, the day of the doubt, the day of the 30th of Shaban when people are in doubt. One cannot fast it on that day unless it falls into his routine. Like he always fasts every other day, he always fasts Monday and Thursday, and that day happened to be a Monday or a Thursday. Whenever you're in doubt, ask a scholar who is in your town and they will answer you. Also, the second half of Shaban. The Prophet ﷺ used to fast Shaban a lot. And he used to say, Shaban is a month that people neglect. Because usually we fast in Rajab, we fast in other months. And in Shaban, we're anticipating Ramadan and we're preparing for Ramadan and we are happy that Ramadan is coming. So many of us may neglect Shaban. But if one does not fast in the first half of Shaban and then decides to fast the second half of Shaban, that's unlawful. If one fasts the first half of Shaban and then goes beyond the first half into the second half, that's okay. So there are certain rules regarding the second half of Shaban. You can read them in the books of fiqh, or you can ask someone that knows. Let's move on to the next slide. What are the integrals of a valid fast? We have two integrals, i.e., two components. Those components are essentials for a valid fast. And of course, there's a third component, which is we need a person to fast, either a man or woman or child or. So the integrals of a valid fast is number one, an-niyyah, the intention. And number two is to refraining from things which break the fast. Al-imsaku an al-mufattirat. And of course, we need people that make the niyyah and refrain themselves. So let's talk a little bit about the niyyah. The intention has also its own components. So in the Shafi'i school, in Ramadan, one must make the intention to fast for each day one fasts. So it's not sufficient to make the intention at the beginning of the month to fast, I'm going to fast all of Ramadan. There's an emphasis on making the niyyah for each day of Ramadan. Each day one fasts. So how do we go about doing this? When Ramadan begins, we make a niyyah that we're going to fast the whole month. That we have the resolve and the determination, and we made a decision that we're going to fast the whole month. And then every night between sunset and dawn, we make a niyyah for the following day, that we're going to fast the following day, i.e. in the daylight. So an-niyyatu li kulli yawmin, the intention to fast for each day one fasts. In Ramadan, or if it's an obligatory fast like kafara or vow or the like. Number two, one has to be specific in the niyyah. What are you fasting? Because niyyah also implies that you know what you're doing and that you're focused on what you're doing. Niyyah implies it's like a mini project. You have the intention to start it and to finish it. You know the beginning, you know the end, and you know what's in between. And you're focused on your act. So you need to know what you're doing. So to be specific is part of the niyyah. So what kind of fast are you doing? Are we fasting Ramadan? Are we fasting to fulfill a vow? Are we fasting by way of kafara? One has to be specific. And number 3, that niyyah needs to take place in the night, preceding the daylight. So at-tabyitu min al-layl. The niyyah needs to be made in the night prior to dawn, between sunset and dawn. And it's pretty easy. Once you develop the habit, as soon as sunset takes place and you're breaking the fast, you're also making the niyyah to fast the next day. In the Shafi'i school, the niyyah needs to be active in your mind, not passive, i.e., you're aware, you're focused, you know what you're doing. You know the beginning of the act, you know the end of the act, you know what goes on in between, all the steps. Same thing with prayer. When you make the niyyah in the beginning, you're focused on your prayer. You know what you're doing. You know the beginning, takbir, you know the end is taslim. You know all the steps that will take place in that mini project called prayer. So the intention is every day, in the night, and be specific. So one example of niyyah is, it could be also the optimal way, is to intend to fast the following day as a current performance of the obligation of Ramadan in the present year for Allah Most High. So you intend in the night, after sunset and before dawn, that you're going to fast the following day, i.e. in the daylight between dawn and sunset, as a current performance. It's not a makeup. It's a current performance of the obligation of Ramadan. Here we are specific. We're talking about the obligation of Ramadan. We're fulfilling the components of the niyyah. So we're intending to fast the following day as a current performance of the obligation of Ramadan in the present year. We are specific. We know what we're doing. We're not fasting in 2022. We're fasting in 2021. And for Allah Most High. So in Arabic would be نويت صوم غد عن أداء فرض رمضان هذه السنة لله تعالى. Every night you make this. And if one is making a niyyah for kafara, one would replace the obligation of Ramadan by the obligation of kafara. If one is making a vow, then the obligation of a vow. If one happens to be uncertain what they're doing, they can make the obligation of an obligatory fast. So at least you be specific that this is an obligatory fast, which encompasses Ramadan or vow or kafara. And we do it in the night between sunset and dawn. Who must fast? What are the conditions for the fast being obligatory? On whom it is obligatory? It is obligatory on all Muslims, males and females, who are of sound health, who are resident. A person may experience 3 states in his life, i.e., I could be a traveler, I could be a temporary resident. I could be a permanent resident. A permanent resident is a place where I call home. This is home, or where I was born, or where I have a family. My family resides. A temporary residence is when I travel and I stay in a place for more than 4 days, or I stay in a place for 6 months, or 2 years, or 10 years, or 20 years, but it's not home. I know I'm going to go back. And I could be a traveler, traveling for less than 4 days or 20 prayers. So those who are either temporary residents or permanent residents, is obligatory on us to fast if we fall into these two categories. If we are traveling, we have an excuse not to fast. So those who must fast, all Muslims who are of sound health, who are residents, i.e. either temporary or permanent residency, and are capable of bearing the fast. Capable of bearing the fast excludes those who are of old age, or those who are sick, or those who have a chronic illness, or those who the fast exhausts them too much, like being of old age and the like. And on Muslims who are morally responsible, i.e., those who have achieved, have arrived at the state of taklif, the state of moral responsibility, i.e., they have reached puberty and are sane. So they are of age and they are sane. What are the conditions for a valid fast? Again, Muslims. A fast is not valid from those who are not Muslims. And you notice here that Islam, or being Muslim, is a condition for both validity and obligatoriness. Fasting is obligatory on Muslims, and fasting is valid from Muslims. Sanity. For a fast to be valid, it needs to be done by a person who is sane. So a person who is insane, even for a moment, the fast is broken. People who are unconscious, and they remain unconscious throughout the day, i.e. from before dawn until after sunset, or they're in a coma, or they're under anesthetics. They're not fasting, even though they haven't eaten anything. So, being Muslim, sanity, and to be free of menstruation or postnatal bleeding. So, of course, if menstruation and postnatal bleedings are signs, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created these signs to tell us when we cannot fast. Or when, let's say, we're fasting, but then a woman starts giving birth, for example. As soon as a woman starts giving birth and there is postnatal bleeding, the fast is broken. And the fourth one is a bit tricky, so I'll just mention it. It's knowledge that Ramadan, that this time I'm fasting in is possible for Ramadan to occur in it. This will be very useful for those who are stranded on islands and don't have anything to guide them as to when Ramadan starts or not, or those who say in prison, or those who have been kidnapped and locked in a basement somewhere. So these are the conditions for valid fast. So Islam, sanity, and to be free of any impediment that will impede the fast, i.e. such as menstruation or postnatal bleeding, or temporary insanity, or full-time insanity, or unconsciousness, or being drunk from before dawn until after sunset. that person who might not have eaten anything, but being in a state of drunkenness, has invalidated their fast. There are many recommended acts to do while fasting. There are many, and I just mentioned a few here, but there are more. Let's just take a look at some of them. So to hasten our iftar is recommended, i.e. not to delay breaking the fast after sunset. If we are sure, we need to be sure that sunset has occurred, then it's recommended to hasten the fast, to hasten the iftar. To break fast on an odd number of dates is also recommended. And if you cannot, water. If you cannot, use something else. To have a pre-dawn meal, suhoor, is recommended. And the time for suhoor begins at midnight, from midnight until before dawn. And midnight, if you recall, it's a midpoint between sunset and dawn. It could be 10 p.m., it could be 10:30, it could be 11:30, it could be 12:30, it could be 1:30 p.m., depending on where you are and depending on the time of the year. Midnight is not fixed in the Islamic calendar. It's a midpoint between sunset and dawn. So when we talk about suhoor, the suhoor times begin at midnight. So to eat something before midnight is not called suhoor. It's called just eating. But to eat something after midnight is called suhoor. So to have a pre-dawn meal is recommended. To delay the pre-dawn meal until before dawn is also another recommended act, if one can do so. To make dua at iftar time is recommended. To feed others is recommended. To pray Taraweeh is recommended. To pray witr is recommended. To make ghusl from major ritual impurity before dawn is recommended. To be extra diligent and to do extra work in the last 10 days of Ramadan is recommended. Because Ramadan, one of the wisdom and benefit of it, we didn't go in much detail over this, is regeneration. You regenerate yourself in Ramadan. The first 10 days, there is mercy, forgiveness, and freedom from hellfire. So by the end of Ramadan, you're regenerating yourself. It's like the trees. Every year they die, and when spring comes, they become alive again. We die every year. We accumulate. We have many shortcomings and many mistakes. And Ramadan is an opportunity for us to regenerate. Like the trees regenerate. To do more good deeds is recommended in Ramadan. To utter more prayers and more salawat on the Prophet ﷺ is recommended in Ramadan. To be extra careful to eat halal is recommended in Ramadan. To take care of the poor and needy and to visit them and ask about them and care about them is extra recommended in Ramadan. To spend on one's family is recommended in Ramadan. To withhold the tongue is obligatory usually, but in Ramadan it's super recommended to withhold the tongue. There are acts which are offensive. We are now on the slide of offensive acts or makruhatus sawm. Anything that will weaken our ability to fast is not good, is offensive. So if cupping, for example, which is permissible at any other time, but if in Ramadan it ends up weakening us, one should not do it. Tasting food, because what breaks the fast is swallowing. But some people have to taste the food because they're either they work as chefs, or they work, or mothers, for example, they have to taste the food. As long as they don't eat it, they taste something and then they spit it out and clean their mouth. Tasting the food without an excuse is offensive. Not minding your own business is offensive. If you keep minding the business of others and getting nosy in the business of others is usually offensive, but in Ramadan is more offensive. Cleaning your teeth in the afternoon after Zuhr, between Zuhr and sunset, in the Shafi'i school is offensive. Not before noon, but in the afternoon. So using miswak in the afternoon is considered offensive in the Shafi'i school. Eating too much at iftar time is offensive. Filling your stomach to the point that defeats the purpose of fasting is offensive. Let's talk about the invalidators, and we'll focus on one invalidator, and then we'll move on to certain scenarios. To scenarios of that invalidates the fast, whether they invalidate the fast or not, which could also be part of the questions and answers that you may be asking. So invalidators are of two types. What breaks the fast are of two types. There are things that break the fast and invalidates the fast, but only invalidates the reward of the fast. i.e., the fast is still valid, but it did not benefit you in any way. It's like you went through hunger and thirst for no reason. And as such, the fast, since the fast is valid, one does not have to make up for that day. However, the reward of that day is gone. So there are things that invalidates the reward, yet the fast is still valid, i.e., you don't have to make it up. But it's like nullified. The reward for it is gone. And there are things that invalidate the fast, i.e., the fast is gone. And automatically, because the fast is no longer valid, there is also no reward because one is not fasting anymore. So what are the things that invalidates the fast in terms of reward? Backbiting. All these things are haram. In Ramadan, they become extra haram. That's why it's extra recommended to avoid backbiting and lying and slandering, unlawful looking at haram things, false testimony, false oath, and the like. And this will invalidate the fast. Cursing people, insulting people, arguing with people. And the Prophet ﷺ said that many people, they go through the process of fasting and they only get out of it only hunger and thirst, nothing else. And the reward for all these days is gone. So controlling the tongue, controlling the eye, controlling the ears, controlling what we read, controlling what we do is developing new habits. Developing these habits. If one is involved in backbiting, when Ramadan comes, this could be an opportunity to if not eliminate, minimize, or reduce this amount and develop a new habit. Regenerate yourself. And the invalidators that we're interested in the books of fiqh are also those acts or those deeds that will invalidate both fast and reward. For example, apostasy. If someone loses interest in Islam um, and leave Islam and become an atheist or become something else, uh, their fast is broken and their fast is no longer valid. Vomiting. Voluntary vomiting breaks a fast, not involuntary. If vomiting overtakes you, it does not break the fast. But to cause vomiting, um, uh, voluntarily, it breaks the fast. Intercourse breaks the fast. Masturbation breaks the fast. Being unconscious from before dawn until after sunset, there is no fast. Being insanity for even a moment in the day breaks the fast. So temporary insanity as well as full insanity. A woman experiencing menstruation or postnatal bleeding or giving birth, her fast is also broken. In fasting, there is a general rule in fasting. Like in wudu, in tahara, in purification, and in ablution, we have a general rule. Anything that exits breaks out wudu, nullifies wudu. In fasting, it's the opposite. Anything that enters nullifies fasting. So any substance, the criterion for invalidators of fast can be summarized in this statement in the red. A substance that reaches the body cavity through an open passageway breaks the fast. Any substance that reaches the body cavity, and the body cavity is any cavity that allows the passage of air. Like if I open my mouth, the air goes through my throat. It's an open passageway to the stomach or to the brain. When you sniff something, it goes through your brain. That's also considered a cavity. An open passageway could be your mouth, could be your nose, could be your ears. We mentioned that the eyes are exempted. The eyes, although they're open medically, they're not open passageway fiqh-wise. The ear also is considered to be an open passageway legally, fiqh-wise. May not be an open passageway medically. So if water reaches the, what's it called? The ear canal or the thing that vibrates, then fast is broken. So when we take a shower and we allow water to go inside, we need to be extra careful. Or when we swim, swimming in Ramadan you can do it without breaking the fast, but you have to be extra careful. So anything that's an open passageway, whether naturally or artificially. So if I were to, any substance, if I were to drill a hole in my stomach and have a tube, and then have food go into my stomach through the artificial tube, that's a substance reaching the body cavity through an open passageway. But this open passageway happened to be artificial, not natural. If someone attacks me with a knife and the knife reaches my stomach, my fast is broken because a foreign substance has reached a body cavity like the stomach, like the brain, like something else, through an open passageway that was opened artificially. If someone, like nowadays, wherever you go, there are people shooting and stuff like this. If someone shoots you and it goes into your stomach, the fast is broken. So any foreign substance that reaches the body cavity through an open passageway invalidates a fast. And from this, you can think of many scenarios. Many scenarios. However, it needs to be a substance, not a scent. So let's say I'm at home and someone is cooking and I smell good food. Smelling good food does not break the fast. Smelling roses does not break the fast. Smelling flowers does not break the fast. Smelling perfume does not break the fast. It needs to be a substance. Substance, something tangible that reaches the body cavity. And the body cavity means the nostrils. If it goes through the nostrils beyond a certain point, the fast is broken. If food goes beyond the letter Ghain or Kha, if you're reciting the Quran, you know Gha or Kha, the fast is broken. If when you make wudu and you put water in your mouth, the fast is not broken unless you swallow it. And swallowing means that the substance has gone beyond the letter Ghain or Kha, i.e. in the upper throat here. Once it goes beyond this level, then the fast is broken. And there are many scenarios here that maybe the questions will probably clarify. I have scenarios that I would like to go through about what invalidates the fast and what does not invalidate the fast. So if you remember, we talked about that the conditions for fasting there's an underlying assumption in fasting. Like there's an underlying assumption in many of the Islamic rulings. In fasting, the underlying assumption is that the fast is broken if you know what you're doing. So if you absent-mindedly do something that breaks the fast, one is excused. So doing something absent-mindedly or out of forgetfulness, like out of forgetfulness, you eat something, and then you remember it's Ramadan. It's excused. Absent-mindedly is excused. Out of ignorance is excused. But out of ignorance is only allowed for certain people. People who live far away from scholars and they have no one to ask. So the access to knowledge is not there for them. Or those who are new Muslims and they're still learning the rules. But if someone has been living amongst scholars or has access to people who have knowledge, ignorance is not an excuse. So ignorance can be an excuse in certain cases, but not in all cases. Doing something absent-mindedly is an excuse. Doing something out of ignorance or out of forgetfulness is an excuse. So let me see, what time is it? So perhaps we can stop here. I'll take questions and answers, and then we'll take a look at the scenarios during the questions and answers. Maybe um, it will come in the questions and answers. Would that work? Yeah, all right, because it's now 6:15, I believe. Let me just open a file on my iPad, and then we can... Mhm. So we have 17 questions so far. Okay. So I will read the question. Or I can show it on the laptop as well, and you can read it. All right. So I'm going to choose questions randomly and then start answering them. So we have one question here. Is it permissible to follow calculations to determine the beginning of Ramadan? Usually when you're in a locality, you fast with the community. So the community, each country, each community may have their own ways of determining the beginning of Ramadan. If you happen not to agree with those ways, or you don't feel comfortable in those ways, you can follow, because citing the moon is for sure. Nobody disagrees on that. There are certain groups that have started to use calculations. So if you happen to be in a locality where they use calculations and you want to go with them, it's up to you. If you don't feel comfortable using calculations, then you can do what you wish without causing an uproar, causing a fitna in your where you are. However, if you happen to be someone who believes that Ramadan has begun through calculations, as we mentioned here, we said there are 9 ways to determine when Ramadan begins. If you cite the moon yourself, you must start fasting. If somebody tells you, someone who is an upright witness, sight the moon, then you must fast. If the country you're in decide that the Ramadan is tomorrow, you have to fast. That's not your responsibility. If someone who is an astronomer or someone who knows calculations tells you that Ramadan starts tomorrow and you believe him, you happen to believe him, then you need to fast. You can fast. If you believe them, then you can fast. It's permissible to fast. In the Shafi'i school, it leans toward citing the moon, not toward calculations. There are a few opinions of scholars here and there that accepted calculations in the past, but the majority of ulama still favors citing the moon. What's the ruling on breaking the fast before hearing the call to prayer in a Muslim country if one believes that the sun has set? This is a bit vague. If one believes that the sun has set, I don't know what the word belief means, but in terms of sunset, just having faith that sunset has come is not sufficient. You need to be sure that sunset has come, or close to certainty that sunset has come. And there are many tools that can help you. So you can use the calendar for sunset, but sometimes the calendar sometimes they print those calendars for 5 years to come, or 6 years to come, or 60 years to come. So if you're not certain that the sunset is happen at 5:05 p.m., give your time a couple of minutes just to be certain that sunset has arrived. Is gargling permissible while fasting? What's important to keep in mind is that swallowing breaks a fast. And if one makes wudu and does wudu normally, and something slips by mistake, it does not break the fast. But if someone exaggerates on wudu to the point they start gargling and gargling and gargling, and then water slips, it's our own mistakes. Because we have created the environment and the conditions for the fast to be broken. So in anything, whether you are making wudu, whether you put something inside your mouth, you have to be extra careful not to have that thing goes beyond the throat or causes to be swallowed. Another question, can we brush our teeth or use toothpaste or mouthwash during the fast? You can, but you have to be careful because some toothpaste use sugar. And when they use sugar, sugar dissolves in water and dissolves in saliva. So you have to, if you brush your teeth, you have to be extra careful to make sure that the sugar inside the toothpaste does not go beyond the throat, i.e. you have to clean your mouth, and you need to make sure that your mouth is not like this, but like this, in order to make sure that no sugar has gone beyond the letter Ghain or Kha. So in all of these questions, you have to be extra careful. And if you're not sure of yourself, don't do it, or do it at a minimum level. Is it permissible to fast consecutive days outside of Ramadan? It is. What's offensive is to fast every day throughout your life. There are certain days that one cannot fast and one should not fast, like the days of Eid, the 5 days of Eid, the day of the doubt. But anything beyond that, one can fast consecutive days. And one can make it a habit as well. I'm going to fast 3 days a week consecutively, or 4 days a week consecutively, or 4 days a month consecutively. You can do that. Can you please explain what it means to hurry to break the fast? Should we pray Maghrib first? It's pretty simple. Once you are sure that Maghrib, that sunset has happened, has taken place, all you have to do is just sip some water or have a date, and then pray your Maghrib, and then have your meal. So there is no conflict between praying Maghrib quickly and also breaking the fast. Can you please explain what it means to hurry to break the fast? I.e., once one is sure that sunset has taken place, one can break the fast. And it's sunnah to hasten breaking the fast. Breaking the fast is different than having a full meal. Breaking the fast can be done with an odd number of dates, or a cup of water, or a cup of milk, or anything. It takes 5 seconds. And then you pray Maghrib, and then you can have your meal. How can a mother with young children to care for make the most of her Ramadan worship? The Prophet ﷺ taught us to give each one their due right. And it's part of justice. إعطاء كل ذي حق حقه. So a mother who cares for her children is actually giving the children their due right. We all have rights and responsibilities. And balancing out the rights versus responsibility is what we call justice. I get my rights, I have rights, and I have obligations. I fulfill my obligations, I also get my rights. A mother maybe has an obligation toward her children, and by fulfilling those obligations, she's actually giving the children their right and their due, and she's being just by doing so. And she can still make the most of Ramadan. Because while she's caring for her children, she can recite Quran, she can make salawat on the Prophet ﷺ. She can, by cooking for her children, she's actually doing an act of worship and an act of devotion to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So perhaps this is like a general answer, but if there is a specific questions or case-by-case scenario, maybe the question can be more specific. But here, maybe we should talk a little bit about breaking the fast. If a woman is pregnant, or if a woman is breastfeeding her child, can she break the fast? There is a rule in fiqh and in the Shafi'i school. Whenever one life is involved, and if someone breaks a fast for a good reason, then only makeup is necessary. When two lives are involved, like a mother and her child, breaking the fast for the sake of another life means that there's a makeup that needs to be done. In addition to the makeup, there is a fidya that needs to be paid. So when one life is involved, only makeup is necessary, is sufficient. When two lives are involved, makeup and fidya, payment. So let's say a woman is pregnant and she breaks her fast, or she does not fast, fearing for herself, fearing for her life, or fearing for harm that could happen to her. She's excused to break the fast, and it's permissible for her to break the fast, and all she has to do is to make up those days. However, if she falls into the condition that she does not really fear for herself, but she fears for her child, she's afraid for her child, she can continue fasting. But because she's afraid for her child, she decides to break her fast. In this case, she needs to make up those days that she didn't fast. In addition, she needs to pay a fidya for each day that she did not fast. So if she breaks a fast, fearing for herself, or for herself and her child, only makeup is sufficient. If she breaks a fast, or she does not fast, out of fear for her child only, then makeup is necessary as well as fidya. And it's fidya per year. So if somebody has not fasted, say 2 or 3 days, they have until next Ramadan to fast those days. If next Ramadan comes and those days haven't been fasted yet, they still need to be fasted. In addition, a fidya needs to be paid, which is the same as zakat al-fitr, equivalent to zakat al-fitr. If a mother is breastfeeding a child, or a woman is breastfeeding another child, and she fears that if she were to fast, there will be not enough milk. There won't be any sufficient milk to breastfeed the child. So she does not fast, or she breaks her fast out of fear for the child. In such case, makeup is necessary as well as fidya. So the rule is, if one life is involved, no fidya. 2 lives are involved, and the fast is broken, or the fast is not made because of fear of another life, then makeup is necessary as well as fidya. Given that mosques are closed due to the pandemic, what should we do to make the most of our night worship? You can pray Taraweeh at home. You can recite Quran at home. You can make dua at home. You can say Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad at home. It can be done at home. And in some schools, it's preferable to do Taraweeh at home, not in the mosque. So if the mosques are closed, this should not prevent us from making the most out of Ramadan. We can still make the most out of Ramadan. And being Muslim is also being adaptable. That you can survive in any environment. You can survive under any conditions. You can adapt to any circumstances. And these are circumstances that will maybe give us the opportunity and the chance to be creative. Do you have any recommendations for those who cannot speak or read Arabic in terms of how they can benefit from the Quran? So let me answer this question first, and then I'll go into another, an extension of this question. Even if someone does not speak or read Arabic, they can benefit from the Quran. Read the Quran in the language that you speak. Read the translation of the al-ma'ani al-asliya, the first level meaning of the Quran. Usually, not all the meaning of the Quran can be translated unless the two languages are similar in everything. You can only translate one meaning of the ayahs, but not all the possible meanings. Read those the translation, which is like a tafsir. This is like a commentary on the Quran in a different language, only translating one meaning of the ayat, not all the possible meanings, and reflect on those. Because the Quran, to everyone can benefit from the Quran, whether they're scholars or they're children, or they're in the beginning, they just started to learn. Everyone can benefit, and the Quran can be a driving force. And there's a meaning that's accessible to everyone. And this meaning is powerful. It can move people to do things. It can move people to do good. It can move people to prioritize doing good, and it can move people to benefit. Now, an extension of this question is: if someone cannot speak or read Arabic, it's never late to start learning. It's never late to start learning Arabic. Actually, it's never late to start learning anything. Because we are, as Muslims, we learn until we die. We have many scholars who started learning at the age of 65. And before that, they were janitors. There was one scholar of Al-Azhar who used to be a janitor. And one night he was cleaning and he hit a student by mistake. And the student called him out, saying, "Oh, Jahil, you're just an ignorant man." And the person who became an imam after, he started thinking to himself, "Yeah, that's true. I'm an ignorant man." And then he started learning. And he became an imam and wrote many books that are being studied today. There are people who started learning at the age of 35. Those who started learning at the age of 45. Those who started learning at the age of 65. Those who started memorizing at the age of 80. Saifuddin al-Amidi memorized Al-Mustasfa of Imam Ghazali when he was 80 years old. And Al-Mustasfa of Imam Ghazali is 4 volumes. He memorized all of it at the age of 80 years old. He said, "I should not leave this world until I memorize this text." Of course, he memorized the Quran like a long time ago. But learning is not something that you do when you're 5 years old or 7 years old or 10 years old only. It can be done at any point in time. And the only things that prevent us from learning is ourselves, because we have limiting beliefs in our brain that prevent us from exploring what we can achieve. Can you offer advice for someone who has a large number of fasts to make up from previous years and is feeling overwhelmed? They say 1,000 steps begin with one step, or a long journey begins with one step. If one feels overwhelmed, the best thing to do is to make it into chunks. I say I have 30 days to fast, and I make it into chunks. I say this month I'm going to fast 1 day or 2 days, and then keep doing it every month, doing it continuously. If you make a plan and follow this plan, even if it is little, and then you can increase it, you can change it, you can adapt it. Does tasting the salt in food break the fast? Again, anything that dissolves in water, we should not allow the saliva to go past the throat. So if salt or sugar dissolves in saliva, you have to spit it out and clean your mouth before swallowing your saliva. Otherwise, we have a foreign substance that has gone through an open passageway and has reached the stomach. So does tasting the salt in food break the fast? It does not, unless you swallow it. But since it dissolves in saliva, you have to be extra careful now not to swallow it. So you spit it out, you wash your mouth, you rinse your mouth, and then you spit it out, and then you can swallow your saliva. Should women who are pregnant or nursing refrain from fasting? This question we just answered briefly is, if a woman is pregnant, there are certain times where it could harm her or it could have an impact on her. And there are certain times where it may not have an impact on her. So it's up to her. If she fears for herself or that harm could happen to her and she breaks the fast, she can do so. She can do so, and she has to make up those days. If she fears for her child, she can also break the fast, and in this case, she has to do makeup as well as fidya per year. Should women who are pregnant or nursing refrain from fasting? It's not mandatory, it's not obligatory. It's up to them, and based on experience or based on the advice of an upright Muslim doctor. If an upright Muslim doctor tells her that you should not fast, then she should not fast, because there's a substitute for that. And or from experience, she began fasting and then it exhausted her. Then she can stop fasting. But should she refrain or not? It's either depending on experience or depending on the advice of an expert doctor who happens to be an upright Muslim doctor. I.e., a Muslim doctor should know about the rulings of fasting, so when he advises her, he or she advises her, taking into considerations these rulings. Is it correct that the Prophet ﷺ fasted for 3 days straight without breaking his fast, but didn't recommend that we do the same? Yes, it's true. It's correct. The Prophet ﷺ did what we call wisal, i.e., he linked days continuously without breaking the fast. And when some of the companions wanted to do the same, he told them, Lestu kahayatikum. You are not like me, and I'm not like you. Abitu inda Rabbi yut'imuni wa yasqini. I stay with my Lord, and He feeds me and gives me drink. Not physical drink and physical food, but i.e., the soul elevates to a point where the need for food becomes less and less. Our soul is not like the soul of the Prophet ﷺ. And for this reason, the Prophet ﷺ told them, do not do it. And it's not for 3 days, it's for a number of days, whether it's 2 days or 3 days or more or less. How can I stay motivated to do good deeds during Ramadan? That's a good question, but it may require more information. How can I stay motivated to do good deeds during Ramadan? Good deeds does not imply that you have to do a buffet and invite everybody. A good deed could be very little. The Prophet ﷺ talked about, we have 10 minutes left, the Prophet ﷺ talked about Shu'abul Iman. And he says, Shu'abul Iman, the highest of which is La ilaha illallah. And the lowest of which is Imatatul Aza an tariq, is to remove harm from the path of people. And between them, there are 60 plus or 70 plus levels of Iman. Feeding people is part of Iman. Inviting your friends and your families for no other reason, just to feed them, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's part of Iman. The same thing here. To do good deeds does not mean that you have to do one, anything can be a good deed. Smiling can be a good deed. So how can I stay motivated? The question maybe is, what's causing you not to be motivated? What's causing us not to be motivated? What's not allowing us to be motivated? These circumstances or this environment needs to be addressed. Certain conditions have caused us not to be motivated. If we can deal with that, we can motivate it. Or to be with people. If you're alone, you cannot be motivated. Be with those that motivate you. But perhaps more information is needed. Does getting the coronavirus vaccine invalidates one fast? This is part of the scenarios I was going to talk about. Is any substance that reaches the body cavity through an open passageway breaks the fast. A needle does not break the fast unless it reaches the body cavity, the stomach, or the brain. A suppository breaks the fast because it's a foreign substance entering the body through an open passageway that happens to be the buttocks. Does getting the coronavirus vaccine invalidates one's fast? A needle, a shot, does not break the fast, usually. Usually. There are certain cases where it may. And the scholars of this century are, there are a couple of positions on that. Should one fast if they suspect that they may have contracted the coronavirus? I'm not an expert on the coronavirus, but I'll give you a general principle. Should one fast or should one not fast needs either experience or an advice of a doctor, an advice of an upright Muslim doctor that tells you if you fast, you're going to harm yourself, or you're going to delay the cure, or delay healing yourself. Should one fast if they suspect that they may have contracted the coronavirus? In general, if something is going to harm me from experience, this could be an excuse for me not to fast, or through an advice of a Muslim doctor, of an upright Muslim doctor. How can someone with many work or school obligations prioritize worship during Ramadan? Ask people who are in your situations. What do they do? How do they prioritize? This is also a general question that need more information to answer the specific assumptions behind this question. Let me just go over some scenarios and So if someone is of old age, they don't need to fast, and they just do they pay a fidya. If someone has a chronic disease, illness, they don't need to fast, and they can pay a fidya. Smoking cigarettes breaks the fast. Shisha breaks the fast. Sniffing something breaks the fast if it goes beyond the nostrils. Suppositories break the fast. Any substance entering from the genitals or from the frontal, from the front or the back of the genitals, breaks the fast. Endoscopy breaks the fast. A tube, an artificial tube going through the stomach, breaks the fast. Any substance going through the mouth or the nose breaks the fast. Tasting food by itself does not break the fast unless you swallow it. Smelling perfumes or smelling food or smelling incense, because in many countries they have incense in homes and in mosques or in places of worship. This does not break the fast. Giving blood as donation does not break the fast. But if it's going to weaken you, then it's offensive. Whatever is going to weaken you and prevent you from fulfilling the obligation of fast in an optimal way, one should try to avoid. But in normal circumstances, if someone is not weakened and they want to donate blood, it does not break the fast if it happens during the day. Taking blood for analysis does not break the fast. Putting ointment or putting honey on your skin and absorption of the nutrients through the pores does not break the fast. Remember, a substance has to enter the body cavity through an open passageway. Eardrops break the fast, according to the majority. There is the matter is debatable among the scholars, but the reliable position is that it breaks the fast, so one should avoid it. Eye drop does not break the fast, but there's an opinion that breaks the fast. So the reliable position does not break the fast. If you want to avoid it, you can avoid it in the day. Getting a shot in your muscles does not break the fast. Anesthetic breaks the fast if it is total anesthetic and lasts for the whole day. So if one is under anesthetics from before dawn until after sunset, the fast is broken. There is no fast. And it has to be full anesthetic, not a partial anesthetic just for your hand or for your jaw, but a full anesthetic. Toothpaste breaks the fast if it mixes with saliva and you swallow it. So toothpaste, you have to be extra careful if you use it. If one vomits involuntary, it does not break the fast. If you vomit voluntary, it breaks the fast. Swallowing saliva does not break the fast unless the saliva leaves your mouth and then goes back in. If it leaves your mouth, it becomes a foreign substance. When it goes back in and you swallow it, it causes you to break the fast. How can this happen? If you happen to be fixing a shirt or fixing, and you're using a thread and a needle, and you put the thread in your mouth and you wet it Once it leaves the mouth, this is now a foreign substance. If you put it back in the mouth, and then that saliva on the thread ends up being swallowed, the fast is broken. So those who works as tailors, or those who mothers fixing the clothes of their children, they need to be extra careful. Dialysis breaks the fast. Cleaning your kidneys breaks the fast. So that's in general, and then you can any other scenarios will be similar to what I mentioned. So this covers around 80% of scenarios. There are 20% of scenarios that are not covered in this session. And if you have a question, please ask those questions, or ask those people of knowledge in your community, in your locality, and they should, inshallah, be able to answer you. Let me see. I think we've answered all the questions. Oh. Does missing obligatory prayer during Ramadan invalidate the fast? Acts of worship are independent. So if one prays but does not fast, we give them credit for praying, and we commend them, and we encourage them to fast. If those that fast without praying, and there are people like that, we give them credit for fasting, and we encourage them to pray. But if one does not pray, it does not nullify the fast. If one does not fast, it does not nullify the prayer. Acts of devotion are independent, and according to Sunnis, and also according likely to Shias. The Mu'tazila, some of the Mu'tazila used to link acts of worship, but not in the opinion of the majority of scholars. What is the correct interpretation of the hadith, fasting is for me and I reward it, and how do we reconcile it with the purpose of fasting as stated in the Quran, i.e. that fasting is for the purpose of taqwa? Taqwa is a benefit of fasting, one of the wisdom and benefit of fasting. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, fasting is for me, i.e. a person fasts for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to get close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is an act that doesn't usually happens between people. If I want to get close to Brother Harun, I don't fast 5 days and then I come to him. He does not care whether I fast or does not fast. So getting into proximity to someone doesn't usually happen when people fast. It happens if I give him a gift. Maybe he'll say, I'm gonna invite you to dinner or something. But in terms of fasting, when you refrain yourself from, and you break your desires for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you break your habits and you tame your soul, you are actually getting close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As-sawmu li wa ana ajzi bihi. And you're not trying to show off. You're at home, nobody is around you, you can eat anything you want. But you still refrain from eating, you still refrain from drinking, you still refrain from sexual intercourse, you still refrain from anything that is an appetite of the stomach or the genitals, just for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And for this reason, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards it. He says, fasting is for me and I reward it. Because only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the reward cannot happen from anyone else. He knows what we go through, and He is the one that will reward us. As for the purpose of fasting is taqwa, it's one of the benefit, one of the wisdom, and there are many benefits and wisdoms, and they're not in conflict. One last question and we stop. Does the COVID test, which requires a nasal or throat swab, break the fast? If the throat swab goes beyond the letter Ghain or Kha, it breaks the fast. If uh, the nasal swab goes beyond the nostrils here, it breaks the fast. So if you want to do a COVID test, do it before Ramadan or do it after sunset. Inshallah, we'll stop here. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Thank you very much for listening to this session. And thank you all for listening to also Imam Tahir and Dr. Abdullah Ali yesterday and the day before when they covered the fiqh of fasting according to the Hanafi and Maliki schools. Thank you very much to the team here, the professional team, taking care of us and making sure that we look nice on screen and switching between the presentation and the speaker and reminding me every once in a while that we have 10 minutes to go or 5 minutes. Inshallah, we'll stop here. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Happy Ramadan and Ramadan Mubarak.